Welcome back to the Sanchez Running House here in Denver, Colorado. We have a full-on tamale assembly line going, but we also have a very special treat with Robert Barba, who has written an essay about what it is for him, like this emotions and nostalgia of tamales. So I want to thank him very much for being willing to share with us with the Smithsonian Latino live mobile broadcast. So do you mind sharing your story?
Sure. I'm reading it via iPhone. And this is something I wrote about 6 years ago regarding my family. I called it Unwrapping a Tradition. Without tamales, there would have been nothing for them to open up as kids. And that's the truth, says my Aunt Lorraine, as she tilts her head in a way that can only indicate she might not be telling the truth. That's how poor we were. It's the day after Thanksgiving, 2010, and I'm sitting in my Aunt Susan's kitchen watching 3 generations of the women in my family make tamales. A dumpling of shredded pork goodness wrapped in corn husks and then shredded. As I watch the women so intricately and affirmatively spread the dough and shred the pork and wrap the tamales that we will devour in less than a month, it seems like a tradition that has gone on for decades. It did in fact go on for decades. This tale, however, is of a tradition reborn. We would have a big assembly line, my mom says, and Mama and her sisters would have a cigarette in one hand and a tamale in the other. They did not, Angela, my Aunt Susan says. I don't remember them smoking. Sue, even now, Aunt Vanjie can't go 20 minutes without smoking, my mom sasses. You think they would have gone all day without a cigarette? Fun fact, my aunt has quit smoking since then. My mom and Aunt Susan, who are 4 days shy from being a year apart, go back and forth like this all afternoon. They debate whether or not the tamales are served on Christmas or on New Year's Day. Aunt Susan brings up the walking doll that my mom got for Christmas one year. She didn't get one, and it's the tragedy of her entire childhood. My mom doesn't remember the walking doll. I didn't care about dolls. I liked the stilts or the roller skates or fighting with the boys, beating them up, making them bleed. It's funny how everyone remembers things different, huh? My Aunt Susan says. It was the memories that returned her to the tamale tradition in 1995, nearly a decade after the death of our family's matriarch, my great-grandmother, Adela Dominguez. There was something missing. It was an empty feeling, my aunt says. Those memories of having the tamales and making them are more important than anything we ever got. And it was from memory that she restarted the tradition in a particularly dark time for our family. My grandmother, Julia Castillo, died in 1992, and the family was still trying to find its footing without its base. That weighed on my Aunt Susan. She was also feeling a sense of emptiness for her 3-year-old daughter, Samantha, and 9-year-old granddaughter, Justina. Despite overflowing gifts, they didn't know the Christmas she knew. It's the kind of Christmas I remember vaguely and vibrantly at the same time. I don't remember a Christmas tree or tamales. I do remember my great-grandparents sitting in the high-back chair together in the corner in awe of their progeny. I remember my great-grandmother's smile as I would run my 4-year-old hands along her 87-year-old skin. I remember my 93-year-old grandpa playing the guitar and singing Decolores, accompanied by my cousin playing a washboard for percussion. And my brother Jack would play the flute like this. Aunt Lorraine says as she blows into the top of a beer bottle. The house erupts with laughter. I remember the enveloping closeness. In those years, my great-grandparents and grandma lived in a shotgun duplex in North Denver. The Highlands, as they call it now. Every room was overflowing with people. So many cousins and aunts and uncles. My great-grandparents had 7 children. Those 7 children gave them 41 grandchildren. And in the 1980s, those grandkids had produced nearly 100 great-grandkids. And with almost all of those people living in Denver, the duplex would overflow. We ate in shifts. The men first, my mom said pointedly, with an eye roll. It's a custom she both actively carries on and abhors. I share that feeling, Auntie, my Aunt Susan's 42-year-old daughter, Livette, says. We have more room now, but we still eat in shifts for the big holidays. Thanksgiving that year was different. Fewer people showed up, and for the first time, my mom and aunt joined us at the dinner table. Let's just put it like this. Had everyone showed up, Sue and I would have eaten standing up in the kitchen. I didn't like it, Susan says, about this year's dinner. I liked the tradition. It just felt weird. My Aunt Susan is a born hostess, something of a Latino Martha Stewart. She has a steady cadre of dishes that are only Mexican dishes that are only rivaled by her saffron rice or her crab lasagna or her eggplant parmesan. If anyone was going to revive tamales, it would be her. Still, although they're delicious now, those first few years were pretty bad. We can all admit that now. Even she can. Yeah, they weren't very good, she says. It took a few years. I was cooking from memory. Making tamales is not exactly easy. In fact, it's pretty labor-intensive, as you can see. And the techniques take years to hone, especially when the maker is bent on doing it from memory. The corn husks are soaked for hours to make them pliable. That year, though, she learned a shortcut: boil them. Oh. The pork used in the filling has to be a pork butt roast, she says, not a pork loin, because that cut doesn't shred easily. It's boiled for 2 to 3 hours. She buys chili pods rather than roasting her own, something she just can't quite master. The masa is made with a special corn meal, lard, and the juice from the pork in the water. But the water has to be warm, she says. The consistency of the masa has to be just right. Hers are also meatier than her ancestors, but that's mostly a function of prosperity. When we would make the tamales, Grandma would say, "Que más poquito," Aunt Susan says, as she spreads just the tiniest sliver of red pork chili on a thin layer of masa, demonstrating how a little bit had to go a long way. She then triples the meat for today's batch. For a woman who keeps 4 different widths of aluminum foil, she has brought efficiency to the process. She does the legwork weeks in advance and freezes everything, so all she has to do on Christmas Eve is steam cook the tamales before dinner. After about 5 years, she hit her stride, and she has since taught her girls how to do it. Justina and Samantha both confidently say they can handle making them on their own. And Susan even brought me a special batch to bring back to Chicago that year to share with my friends who only know tamales from late night runs to Mexican restaurants after too many overpriced cocktails. She called me every few hours that day. "Sonny, have you taken them out of the freezer yet?" A few hours later, she calls back to ask if I bought enough cheesecloth for the pot. They were a hit. They are devoured. To me, the tamales have always represented something deeper. They're one of those last remaining pieces of a heritage that grows more and more distant with each generation. They represent the Mexican side of our Mexican-American culture. They complement Brenda Lee's rocking around the Christmas tree rather than stand in opposition to it. To my mom and my aunts, though, it's a much more emotional symbol. Aunt Susan patched a hole in our family's tapestry. Tamales may not have been the only thing they had to unwrap for Christmas, but they're the things of lasting memories. Thank you.